Okay, lecture 35 part 2 is going to be about recursive sequences. So this is a specific type of sequences you're going to have to deal with. So starting out, what is a recursive sequence? Well, oftentimes a sequence is given by starting or stating the first term, then writing a formula for the nth term. Remember our nth term? That's a sub n right there. So there's our nth term involving the preceding terms. Okay? So what that means is we've got our nth term, but in order to find every term in this sequence, we're going to need some of the preceding terms, the terms before that. Okay? So essentially what you're going to do is we're going to look at our a sub 1, and we're going to have to plug that into our formula. Then we're going to have to take our result, we're going to have to plug that into the formula. Then we're going to take that next result, we're going to plug that into the formula. Okay? When you guys do these types of problems, they're going to ask you typically to list out the first 5 terms. So if I have a sub 1, that is my first term. Okay? So if they want me to list out the first 5 terms, I'm going to start out with a sub 1. I need to know what that equals. I'm going to start out, I'm going to change colors on that. So I'm going to need to know a sub 1. I'm going to need to know a sub 2. A sub 3, A sub 4, and A sub 5. Okay, the reason I'm saying those specific terms are typically the question will specifically ask for the first 5 terms. A sub 1 is my first term, A sub 2, second term, A sub 3, third term, A sub 4, fourth term, A sub 5, fifth term. Now, nice thing about this, we've already got an answer for one of these. A sub 1 equals 1. Okay, and they tell you that. Okay, that's one of the terms that they give you. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to find a sub 2. So I'm going to look at my nth term here. I'm not looking for a sub n. I'm looking for a sub 2. So it's not an n there now. Now it's a 2, which means that I'm going to take 4 times not a sub n minus 1, but a sub 2 minus 1. Okay, so I've got a sub 2 equals 4 times a sub 2 minus 1. Well, 2 minus 1 is 1. So I've really got 4 times a sub 1. Well, what was a sub 1? Well, we need to look back, and I can see that a sub 1 was 1. So I'm really taking 4 times, not a sub 1, I'm going to take 4 times 1. Okay, so I've took my 1 and I plug it into my formula. When I take 4 times 1, that gives me 4. Okay, then next I'm looking for a sub 3. Okay, so they've got a 3 plugged in here for n, which means I need to have a 3 plugged in here. So that tells me I'm looking for 4 times a sub 3 minus 1, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So I'm looking for a sub 2 there. So this is going to equal 4 times a sub 2, which from looking at our previous here, I know that a sub 2 is 4. So I'm going to plug a 4 into this formula. And 4 times 4 equals 16. Next, I'm going to look for a sub 4, which means I'm looking for a sub 4 minus 1. That gives me 4 times a sub 3 equals 4 times, well, what's a sub 3? Well, I can look back at my previous term and see that a sub 3 was 16. So now I need to take 4 times 16. Oops, wrong color there. And 4 times 16 gives me 24 and 40, so 64. Write that in blue. And then I've got my last term is a sub 5. So I've got a 5 plugged in for my n. So that's 4 times 5 minus 1 is 4. So that's 4 times a sub 4 equals 4 times, what was my a sub 4? Look back at my formula. My a sub 4 was 64. And that's going to equal my 5th term, which is 16, 240, 256. I'm going to write that one in red. Okay? Now I wrote these colors out in a pattern so you guys can kind of see. We started out, I plugged in my first term to figure out my second term. I plugged in my second term to figure out my third term. I plugged in my third term to figure out my fourth term. I plugged in my fourth term to figure out my fifth term. Okay? It's kind of a little pattern that you have to follow. The way that you would want to write your final answer on this is in braces, just like we did with the sequences on the last one. And I'm just going to list. First term was 1. Second term was 4. Third term was 16. Fourth term was 64. Fifth term was 256. And since this is technically going on, we're going to put our 3 dots or ellipses at the end of that. Okay, so that's a recursive sequence. Okay, we're going to work through a couple other examples. So hopefully you guys get these down. Okay, first one, I've got a sub 1 equals 5. And then it says a sub n equals 3 times a sub n minus 1 minus 5. And it wants us to write out the first 5 elements. So I need to know a sub 1 equals a sub 2 equals a sub 3 equals a sub 4 equals and a sub 5 equals. Starting out, a sub 1. I already know a sub 1 is 5. Okay, let me write that in color again. So a sub 1 is 5. Now, a sub 2 is going to be 3 times a sub 2 minus 1. So that's going to be a sub 1. And then I've got just a minus 5 there. So when I plug this in, I've got 3 times my a sub 1, which is 5, minus 5. 3 times 5 gives me 15, minus 5 gives me 10. So my a sub 2 is 10. Next, I need to figure out a sub 3. That's going to be 3 times a sub 3 minus 1. So that's a sub 2. Okay, again, just to make sure we're understanding that, I'm looking for a sub 3. So my n value on these is 3. And if I take 3 minus 1, that's going to give me my 2. Okay, so I've got 3 times a sub 2 minus 5, which is 3 times, what was my a sub 2? My a sub 2 was 10 minus 5. 3 times 10 is 30. And then 30 minus 5 gives me 25. Fourth term, 3 times a sub 4 minus 1. So that's 3 times a sub 3. Now minus 5 equals 3 times, what was my a sub 3? Well, it was 25. Minus 5. 3 times 25 is 75. Minus 5 gets me to 70. Okay. Last one then. 3 times a sub 5 minus 1. So a sub 4 minus 5. So I get 3 times, what was my a sub 4? Well, a sub 4 was 70. Minus 5. 3 times 70 gives me 210. And 210 minus 5 gives me 205. Okay, so again, we can see our pattern. To find our second term, we had to plug in our first. To find our third term, we had to plug in our second. To find our fourth term, we had to plug in our third. And to find our fifth term, we had to plug in our fifth. Okay, one more example. It's a little bit trickier than the others. Okay, I got one more example, a little bit trickier. Again, first 5 terms. So I need to know a sub 1, a sub 2, a sub 3, a sub 4, and a sub 5. Okay, if I look at this up here, I notice that I'm actually given my first 2 terms. I've got a sub 1 equals 5. I've got a sub 2 equals 10. So I can fill those out right from the get-go. Add my equal signs in here. We said a sub 1 is 5 and a sub 2 is 10. Okay, now on this one we got to pay a little bit closer attention Okay, our nth term formula is a sub n equals a sub n minus 2 plus 2 times a sub n minus 1. So I'm looking for a sub 3, which means that I need my term to be a sub 3 up here, which means I've got a sub 3 minus 2 and 2 times a sub 3 minus 1. So my formula for a sub 3 is going to be a sub 1, because 3 minus 2 gives me 1, plus 2 times a sub 2, because 3 minus 1 gives me 2. Okay? So that gives me a sub 1, which is 5, plus 2 times a sub 2, which is 10. 2 times 10 gives me 20, plus 5 gives me 25. Next step, we're ready for a sub 4. So that's a sub 4 minus 2, and 2 times a sub 4 minus 1. So when I plug that in, 4 minus 2 gives me 2, so I've got a sub 2 plus 2 times 4 minus 1 gives me 3. So that's a sub 3. So that's going to equal, my a sub 2 is 10, plus 2 times my a sub 3, which we just found out was 25. So 2 times 25 gives me 50, and 50 plus 10 gives me 60. Okay? And then my last one, I've got a sub 5. A sub 5 is 5 down there, so that's 5 minus 2, and that is 5 minus 1. So I've got 5 minus 2 gives me 3, so that's a sub 3 plus 2 times 5 minus 1 gives me 4, so that is a sub 4 equals a sub 3, which is 25, plus 2 times a sub 4, which a sub 4 is 60. And that equals 2 times 60 gives me 120, plus 25, 120 gives me 145. So again, my answer, I think I may have forgot to write that on the last one. I want to write them out. 5, 10, 25, 60, 145, and it keeps going on. Okay, make sure you put them in the braces. And that is our recursive sequence.